And then we'll just a few seconds just to let people trickle in.
Sure. And then I go back. Welcome, everyone. Denise, I'm going to pass the mic for you to do the official kickoff. And then I'll.
Okay, welcome everyone again. We are officially convened and would like to get started pretty much on time with today's webinar. At this point, I think I will turn it over back over to John to introduce the panel and get us started.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Sean and Carolyn, for being here with us as our guests. My name is John Bracken. I'm the Executive Director of DPLA, and I get to introduce the conversation we're going to have today. First, before I do that, I'm going to take a little bit of executive privilege and give you all an update on what we've been up to at DPLA during this eventful first quarter of the year. You know, I want to start by giving a shout out to the DPLA team. Like a lot of folks, we've been hit in the last couple of weeks, really the last month. We, as individuals and a lot of our families, have been hit by COVID and other related illnesses that I know a lot of you have too. In particular, I want to give a shout out to Kat Williams, who really did the legwork of organizing this event. While I in particular have been knocked out on my back for the worst part of the last 2 weeks. So I appreciate you all joining us, and I appreciate the team coming through during this, you know, really continuous challenging time. And throughout all of the last 2+ years, I think I can speak with confidence that the DPLA team has just been stellar and strong and a joy to be part of. A couple of things just to highlight for you, and then a couple of things to talk about that we're also working on to look for. Many of you may have seen the Black Women's Suffrage collection and project that we launched early, I guess, you know, a year, gosh, now I think 2019. And that Black Women's Suffrage collection continues to be something that we're working on and nurturing and growing. The latest partnership we have in that is with Emory University to make the Women's Era newspaper available. And so you can look out and hear more about that coming up. Our colleague Audrey Altman continues to think and write about the overlap and sort of the special sauce between curatorial work and technology and machine learning in particular. And she wrote a post recently that continues some thoughts she's been doing around where the possibilities are for tools like machine learning for curation that really lives up to our commitments as an institution. And so if she hasn't already, the Wonders Cat's going to throw a link to that into the chat. The other bit I wanted to highlight is work relating to our ebooks project. As many of you know, we've launched an app called the Palace Project in collaboration with our partners at Lyrasis that is live and available to download. If your library is not yet part of the project, you can ask them if they want to join and learn a lot more through the Palace project. But you can also access the more than 10,000 openly licensed books that are available as well, regardless of your library context. It's the largest curated collection of openly licensed ebooks available. Today, I think it's today, I think we rolled it out today. We also announced an additional 85,000 titles in Palace from PRH. Those are now available, and that brings us to over 1 million titles available through the Palace Marketplace from over 1,000 publishers. So we're really excited about that progress. Many of those of you that were at PLA in Portland last month got to hear updates from us and from our partners at Lyrasis from Palace. Micah May, who is our director of ebooks, we'll be on the road this spring at conferences, and we'll probably be doing more webinars in the spring talking about that work. And certainly at ALA Annual in June, we expect to give more of an update. This month is a really busy one for us. This week is a busy one for us. We have 3 events coming up. And I might just shorten this by saying, going to the short link that lists all of our events, which is bit.ly/DPLA-events. But this week, I guess I want to highlight just a couple of things briefly. One, we've kicked off a series called Collaborating for Access. It's a partnership we've been doing with COSLA and with Readers First. And our conversation tomorrow that we're holding is focusing on creating more inclusive ebooks. And it's with Jason, whom many of you know from the National Library Service, Darren Dufresne and Aaron Rodriguez who have started an app called Visling, and a UX designer named Regine Gilbert. And so that's a conversation that, it's the second in a series that we've been doing with COSLA and Readers First on this larger notion of collaborating for access. And that's tomorrow afternoon. Our network members, the members in the DPLA network, we have our meeting on Thursday. And you all have seen an email and an invite, and a draft agenda is beginning to go out for that. And we also have a member meetup conversation at the end of the month on Thursday, the 28th, focusing on libraries and the opportunities and possibilities inherent in the decentralized web. The last thing I'll say before introducing the board members that are here to make sure that we see them is we're looking to kick off some additional discussions this spring. Many of you were part of a discussion we had around genealogy recently, and we've been in conversations with some of you about how we want to extend that conversation. So we're beginning to develop that. And questions around where technology and the ethics of technology come up against our values as libraries and museums is something we continue to explore. So that's something we'll be kicking off. So that's my update on what the team has been up to here at DPLA. If you have questions, we'll hopefully have time later today to take them on. And I'll ask the DPLA team members that are here to raise their virtual or literal hands. And we've got lots of opportunities coming up this month to talk more about the work. I did, before passing the baton on, I do want to acknowledge the DPLA board members who are here. And I don't know if you guys are on camera or not. I'm going to cycle through, but you can see the DPLA board members. And you heard from Denise Stevens at the kickoff, and I see Joe Lucia from Temple University, and I see Elaine Westbrooks of the University of North Carolina, but soon to be moving on to new positions. Congratulations, Elaine. And Felton Thomas is here, and Josh Fraser Sparks is here, and I'm just cycling through, and Marsha Walker McWilliams is here. And Jill Bourne is here. Hello, Jill, from San Jose. And the last person, last but not least, the bat signal went out today to Kelvin Watson to ask him to be part of, oh, and Laura DeBonis is here, sorry, on the phone. Thank you for that text message. I just looking at the video chats. Laura DeBonis is here from Washington, DC. Kelvin Watson is the executive director of the Las Vegas Clark County Library District. And when we had a need in the fall, something fell through this morning, and I reached out and asked him if he could be part of this discussion. He agreed to lead it on. I will introduce by title Sean Anderson from ImagineIF Libraries in Flathead County, Montana. Thank you so much for being part of this with us. And Carolyn Foote from Freedom Fighters in Texas. And I guess I should say part of what brings us to this topic, maybe it's obvious, but just to be clear, as a team, as we've tracked the book challenges and takedowns and removals of titles, across the country, we've been asking the question about what's our role and responsibility as an asset and an ally to our partners as an organization committed to free access of knowledge. And in particular, since the abundance of this push back seems to be centered around LGBTQIA plus titles and authors, and Black authors and titles focused on the Black experience and other people of color authors, it really felt like an urgent topic for us to think about. And I know a lot of folks, especially our partners at ALA, are really taking the lead on this. We wanted to lean in to the possibility to hear some really local and place-based stories and tales about what folks are confronting and how folks like Sean and Carolyn are taking the lead on standing up to these really scary the scary moment. So with that, I'm going to stop and hand the mic over to you, Kelvin. Thank you again for leading this conversation, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, John. Everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's morning here in Las Vegas for me, and so I'll start out before moving into moderation and the panel and talking a little bit about some housekeeping things. John set this up really nicely, but just want to talk about that book banning is the most widespread form of censorship in the United States, primarily around children's literature, but we're seeing attacks from at all literature. But and these advocates for book banning or certain books fear that with the content, they see it as potentially dangerous. They commonly fear that these publications will present ideas, raise questions, and incite critical inquiry among children, parents, and all of us, political groups or religious organizations as well. And frankly, these folks are individuals who may or may not be ready to address these particular issues in their own homes, for example, or that they just find them inappropriate. And so, as John mentioned, libraries are certainly tackling these things. And with these recent efforts to remove books and other resources from library shelves, we're going to hear from Sean and Carolyn, really talking about how they've been responding to these censorship efforts and what steps we can take to preserve free access to knowledge. So before I turn it over to Carolyn and Sean to kind of give a little bit of more introduction about themselves and some of the efforts, just want to remind everybody that if you have a question, please use the Q&A function here in Zoom, and I will be using that to ask questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn first, and hear from her for 3 to 5 minutes, and then I'll turn it over to Sean. Again, thank you.
Hello, everyone from Austin, Texas, where I am part of a team of librarians around the state, sort of loosely organized, who came together in the fall when Texas started on its own book journey. When if you're not familiar, one of our representatives, Matt Krause, sent a list of 850 book titles to some superintendents in the state, not all, asking them to see if their library collections contain these books and any other books that might cause shame or guilt around race or sex, and to give an indication of the cost of these books. Some school districts responded, some school districts said, no, we're not responding to this, because our legislature's not even in session. He didn't really have any specific authority to send this out. And I'm sure you've all seen this gradually creep and explode across the country, so I don't have to reiterate that. But a few of us who had been working together on these issues last spring came together and did a Twitter hashtag takeover using the hashtag FReadom, FReadom, and the Texas legislative hashtag. And we secretly notified partners, authors to participate sort of as a one-day event. And we had over 13,000 tweets that day and trended 6 on Twitter. And we realized the hunger for voices speaking up on this issue was really there. And so our goal as a group has really been to uplift librarians, highlight positive powers of diverse literature for students, offer resources for librarians, and track what was going on. And really, we knew that our partners would be engaged in this, like TLA, the Texas Library Association, ALA, but that it might take them a while to issue statements. And so we really started as a grassroots group that we just wanted to right away have a response to this and not let school librarians be labeled as pornographers without any sort of rebuttal. It's a very difficult climate in Texas and many other states right now for teachers and school librarians, as I'm sure you are aware, with different bills and laws that have been passed. And even if there aren't bills like in Texas, we do have a divisive concepts bill that was passed, but we aren't in session again until 2023. But that hasn't really stopped our governor and representatives from going after librarians, sometimes by name, like a colleague of mine is experiencing this today. And we're also being caught, frankly, in this sort of whiplash. So cycle back to, 2020, 2019, when everyone was opening up their minds about, were we really having equitable approaches to content and conversations in our country? And librarians were, making people aware of resources we had. And then now that same conversation is really being weaponized against librarians and teachers in schools. And so it's not that, so it's really a hard situation that people are caught in. And I think what is particularly, our real focus is on our students, and we want to be resources, as teachers do, for students so that they are prepared for the larger world when they leave school, whatever that looks like, whether it's college or the workplace. And so we've seen that these book lists are obviously targeting LGBTQ and authors and characters and authors of color. And so, as librarians, we know that sometimes libraries are the safest spaces for students that feel marginalized, like in their school. And so we feel it's really important that we're out there advocating for their right and for students to be able to be the heroes of their own stories and to see themselves reflected on the shelves of libraries. So we've sponsored some weekly actions on Twitter. We've had some monthly actions, like tomorrow we're celebrating Drop Everything and Read Day by having Drop Everything and Read a Banned Book Day. We've had actions like writing school boards letters. So we are just doing what we can to elevate the story and be media contacts for people to understand. And, my real concern now is just it's hitting really hard in Texas and other states right now. And librarians are walking away from the field because it's, even if their school district's supporting them, when you're being demonized on social media by name or being threatened, it's a very challenging environment in which to work. And so we really appreciate DPLA support and any support we can get from any quarter to understand we're just resources for students. We're using our professional guidance to do our jobs.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Sean.
Thank you. My name is Sean Anderson, and I am the senior librarian at Imaginef Libraries in Flathead County, Montana. We are a county of about 100,000 people in Northwest Montana. So just a little bit of background about our library and our area before I get into the reasons why I was invited to come talk to you all. So we are, like I said, we're a relatively small county in Northwest Montana. We've gotten relative headlines recently because we are among the fastest growing counties in the United States, among the fastest growing in the state of Montana, with people relocating all over the United States from major cultural centers. We are rising to the top of those lists for where people want to be. So we're a relatively small county in the big scheme of things, but we are getting very large very quickly. We're sort of in the middle of this cultural transition to a much more populated area, a place with much different service needs, and sorting out how to provide library services is part and parcel of that cultural transition. So what we've experienced in about the last 6 months is really pretty new to us. So going back to when I started at Imaginef Libraries, we are the Flathead County Library System. We rebranded ourselves in 2014, basically to align ourselves with a more forward-thinking vision of public library services. We make no secret that we are not simply a repository for books, that we are here for programs. We play a role in the broader educational spectrum in Flathead County. We have a role to play, as all public libraries do, in economic development in Flathead County. So we've been pretty clear about the positioning ourselves as an institution in this area. We've had an awful lot of success in that time. We received the John Cotton Dana Award in 2014 as a result of our work in rebranding. We've been invited to talk to people at PLA, at the Texas Library Association, oddly enough, in recent years to talk about how we work with staff and how we develop our staff, and then continue to offer outstanding library services. I think the big question that we get all the time is how we're able to do all of these things that we do without a significant budget. We serve an area, or we serve a population of, according to the census, about 105,000 people with a budget of about $2 million, less than $2 million. So we do an awful lot in providing progressive, forward-thinking library services to a growing and changing population on a really pretty small budget. And a lot of that goes to the work that our staff has done to understand the nature of public service and what the role that libraries play in a community like ours. And I mention that because that kind of comes in stark contrast to what the last year of Imaginef Libraries has been, which, I mean, I don't really want, and I don't think anybody listening to this wants to have me recount the details of what's happened in the last year or so. But in short, we've been the recipient of a number of materials challenges, specifically titles that are related to LGBTQIA topics. These are the main characters of these titles that we've received book challenges on. And that's, a materials challenge is something that we're familiar with. We're trained as librarians on how to handle those things appropriately. What we weren't familiar with in the same way is how to manage a book challenge with a board that is hostile, with a, I've not seen a viral materials challenge the way that we've seen. These titles that we've gotten challenges on are the same ones that Carolyn's been battling over. And so dealing with the public pressure that goes along with that, the viral nature of these challenges has been a new challenge. So that's what we've been working with, and the trickiest thing has been the fallout that comes as a result of it. You know, with our board and staff culture the way that it has been the last year, it's just led to a ton of turnover. We lost our previous director, Connie Behe, in late 2020. And our interim director, Martha Furman, resigned about, I can't even remember, about 6 months ago, I would say. And we were, you know, in the midst of these materials challenges, left without nominal leadership. We did not have a director. And I think the reason why I've become sort of the face of this, our own materials challenges, is simply because I'm the last person standing. And I'm certainly prepared and willing and happy to play that role. But it's been a real education in the role of libraries. The exact details of what we are responsible for doing, how libraries go about doing it, what are best practices. And it's also been an education in issues of the First Amendment and communication strategies and building consent with people who, quite honestly, disagree with you on just about every topic that you can imagine. You know, it's in my experience, or in my past experience, it's been enough to say that, you know, that's what libraries have that's the role that libraries have always played, that we are here to balance all sides, to represent all sides. But it's become a reality in a way that I don't think I have ever experienced, and I don't think a lot of our peers around the state of Montana and even around the country have had to reckon with. What does it mean in very real terms to represent all sides of an issue? What does it mean to offer books with queer characters and queer topics in an area that is about as Republican, conservative, right-wing as it gets here in Flathead County? How do you continue to offer progressive, well-funded library services in the face of materials challenges and hostile boards and conservative politics? And I by no means am an expert in those things, but I do think, I mean, I've gotten the short course as hard as anybody's gotten the short course in this. And it's not anything that I've done myself. I take precious little responsibility for our response. And a lot of that credit goes to our peers around the state, our support organizations and professional organizations around the country, and more than anything to our staff and the community that supported us through all of this. So, yeah, I'm very happy and very proud to be able to talk to you all and share our experience. Hopefully it can be of some use. But I'll let you, Kelvin, sort of lead the discussion from here.
No problem. Thank you, Sean. Thank you. Don't forget, everyone, if you have any questions, we don't have any yet, so I've in the Q&A, please post some. I've been just writing down some questions. I'm familiar with both what's happening in Flathead, been following that for the past 6 months when the interim director resigned. So I'll start with you, Sean. I have some questions for you as well, Carolyn. If we don't get any, I've got some for you also. So and actually, I'll do this question and kind of for both you, Sean, and for Carolyn, and it really deals with you. You know, again, this may be more personal, but your thoughts around libraries and our being neutral or neutrality. And so I'd like to hear just some thoughts around that from you, Sean, and Carolyn as well, if you have any around how that plays into or doesn't play into what's happening.
Sure. Carolyn, do you want me to go first? Okay. I think that question of neutrality and how we feel about it is sort of the crux of everything that we've been reckoning with. And it's really pretty difficult to talk about. And that you're right that it is a personal conversation because I think there have been times in the recent past with the events that we've experienced where we have not perhaps been as neutral as we think we are being, that we are not representing all of the community the way that we believe we are, and that not treating neutrality as a zero-sum game. That if queer voices are represented in the public library, that does not mean that conservative voices are not represented, and vice versa. That by having very conservative books on the shelf, it does not negate the importance of those other less well-represented voices. The feedback, or one piece of feedback that we got along the way from some of our county commissioners, is that they were hearing from some constituents that they didn't necessarily feel welcome in the public library when they would come in and see, all of this sort of came in the wake of, the events of 2020 and 2021, where there was just tons and tons of social upheaval, and because of that, the sort of cultural consciousness turned to things like racial equity and LGBTQ issues, and how to respond to government overreach. And because the cultural consciousness was so focused on those things, that's what our new collections were looking like, and that's what was on display. That's what we saw the conversation as being. And so the feedback that we've gotten was that seeing LGBTQ books and resistance titles right when people walk in the library was creating an unwelcoming situation for them. It's hard to say, but that's something that is kind of hard to argue with. Neutrality is different from the kinds of things that we are advocating for and what we're choosing to put on display. And I guess the way that we've responded to that, or the way that we've worked really hard to think about it, is just going back to our more core responsibilities as librarians. What is our role, and what is our job? What sort of duty do we have to our community? And that goes to what's enumerated in state law, in our charter with Flathead County, with our state library, and it's to maintain free, fair, and open access to these materials, and that is not at all going to change. But it's also been helpful to balance that with the places where we can make some changes and where we can try and find some common ground with our detractors, that there is room to move on what we choose to display, what we choose to face out on our shelves, and where we choose to do that in relation to the space that we have in the library. It's been very, very, very difficult to rectify that. with my own personal beliefs and try and rectify it with my professional responsibilities as a librarian. So it has been, it's been a very, very difficult thing to reckon with. And it's sort of, it makes you take a really close look in the mirror and recognize what your responsibilities are and try and balance that with being able to sleep at night.
Right.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, Carolyn, go ahead.
I love how you've framed that. And I think that one of the challenges for us as school librarians is that mostly last spring, some of the book challenges were more centered around DEI, or what schools call diversity, equity, inclusion topics. But as it segued to this fall, you know, the dialogue has changed. And frankly, we'd love it in schools to be framed around the crux of neutrality and looking at how we can, you know, better represent, because it's really been framed as school librarians are peddling pornography and obscenity, and those issues are being used really as a Trojan horse, because inside of the Krauss book list, you know, a few of the books are on there because they think they're too explicit, but it's mainly addressing LGBTQ topics, authors of color, sex education, Supreme Court laws like Roe v. Wade, which we have books on both sides of the aisle on those sorts of topics already. But because it's being framed in terms of this obscenity, pornography, vulgarity frame, it's very difficult to have the conversation that would be good to have about neutrality and because it's become for us not even about that. And so so I just think that is an important distinction between what's happening in school and public libraries. I know public libraries are also receiving pressure around those same issues in Texas anyway, the pornography topic. And it reminds me of Austin Public Library went through quite a long period of discussion about Madonna's book called Sex. And that was whenever that came out in the 90s or whenever that was, you know, where it was a similar kind of case and argument and so on. But, and I haven't looked back to that to really see how that all ended up getting framed and talked about. And I think that, you know, sometimes the argument about representation isn't, it's being framed as though libraries are overrepresenting LGBTQ students, for example. And looking at my former district's collection, because I'm retired / rewired this year, you know, like 0.05% of the collection addressed LGBTQ authors and characters. So it's minuscule. And it really, we are underrepresenting those students in terms of having titles on the shelf. But the way the argument's been framed, it's not underrepresenting, that we're overrepresenting. And then, you know, sort of the old tropes that have come into play about, you know, linking LGBTQ individuals with, you know, pedophilia and everything else under the sun, it is gotten trotted out. And so it's just become a very challenging environment. And the other thing that I think is getting lost a lot in the school discussion is these targets are really singularly also targeting authors of color. And we're not even having that part of the discussion either, unless books by authors of color have scenes in them that are considered explicit and then being used sort of as a weapon. And so I think that there's just a lot of challenges that we're facing. And I would love if we could force as a profession this into a frame of, let's have this conversation about neutrality. Let's not have a conversation about banning books. Let's look at how can we always look to improve what we're doing and to do a better job of it. And it's just, it's not a, and I think that's a goal we should strive for, because I think these voices are not the majority. And I think people are tired of the disruptions. And I think if we can take upon our role as librarians to have civil conversations and to set up civil dialogues and to show that that is something we value as democratic institutions, that I think that's an important role we could play.
Thank you. We got some questions in the chat, so I want to try to get to these. If you can, we have a few. So if you can give a briefer answer, we'll get as many of them done as we can. So let me get to this one. It says the naysayers on these books in the boardrooms and on social media are often stressing bad language and explicit sex and YA novels as the reason for challenging them, even though many of the books in question have zero sex. How do you get past the shock value of parents learning about sex in teen books? So I'll let you take that one, Carol.
Well, that's definitely a problem. And it's not just parents, it's school board members, it's curriculum directors in school districts who haven't been in the classroom in a long time and haven't read a young adult novel in 25 years. So part of it is, I think, just trying to, I use analogies when I talk to people, like, we need to help people to understand the growth of young adult literature and the history of it. And I use analogies from television, like we went from one channel in Austin, when I was a kid, to now we have streaming and endless amounts of channels. And in between, we made a stop at VHS tapes and so on and so forth. And, things evolve over time and our culture changes over time. And just trying to help people understand that continuum is one way to address that. And also, of course, the constant library framing of you have to read the whole work. You have to judge a book by its whole. That's what the Supreme Court requires of school libraries and removing materials. So those are sort of the two pieces I use. And I will say this, it is a real challenge. And I talk to people about triggering. And if you take it out of the context of the reaction and talk about how do we respond to triggers, that's part of being civically educated, is not being duped by triggers all the time. So you have to help people understand how to respond to things that are meant to be triggering.
So this question is for both of you. Thank you, Carolyn. So it says, what role do you think national library organizations generally and DPLA in particular can play in supporting you around these issues? So we'll start with you, Sean.
I haven't had cause to work with DPLA very much at all. I'm aware that DPLA works with the Montana State Library in a significant way to do things that the state library wants to do and to help out with collaborative services that we offer on a statewide level. But I guess what I can talk more about is the role that national library organizations like PLA and ALA can play. And I guess in my experience, the biggest one is just advice. I've had a dozen phone calls with Debbie Caldwell Stone at the Office of Intellectual Freedom in the last 6 months, just to try and get some deeper understanding about the context of what it is we're dealing with, understanding the liabilities that the board or the library might be exposing themselves to with whatever action we choose or the board chooses to take. I think that context and that knowledge about the legalities, the historical context, other relevant case law that might be related to what we're dealing with, that's been most helpful. You know, we've since all this has happened, an advocacy organization has sprung up that's gotten some legal assistance and has some opportunities for some financial assistance from every library. But that almost seems like a second or third step down the line. The very first role that a national organization can play is really just that, being a sounding board, being the knowledgeable resource for legal questions, for case law, for similar situations that other libraries are going through.
Thanks, Sean. Carolyn.
You know, I think that, as Sean mentioned, I know librarians around the country have been on the phone with OIF as well. And that has been a tremendous resource. And I'm hoping that the coalition that ALA put together, Unite Against Book Bans, and the Texas has one called Texans Right to Read that launched last month, that they will find ways to support. But what I hope most of all is that organizations, I would love to see organizations like DPLA sit down with ALA and lots of other players in the field, publishers, vendors, and have a convening so that everyone's message can really get on the same page, and that so we can really portray who librarians really are. And this really, to me, requires a clear message and, you know, not a soft kind of, you know, libraries are great, but, you know, who are librarians? Who are we really? Because everyone knows the librarian. And when you take it out from this huge rhetoric, and then you pull it down to your librarian at your elementary school or your public librarian who helped you, you know, people relate to them on an individual level, and it's like breaking through that. So I don't know what that looks like, but I just think it's past time for all these organizations to come together and convene around messaging so that there's some uniformity and that there's some clear pushback. Because I tell you, for a lot of times it feels like we're just, especially the part of being denigrated personally and dragged across social media, and, you know, which I've experienced, my friends are experiencing, you know, that isn't a battle we should be fighting by ourselves by any means.
Yeah.
And Carolyn made me think of something that's been floating around in my mind, that I think national organizations like ALA or DPLA or PLA could play, not just talking about libraries in the personal context, but also going back to how libraries work. I think what's become really sort of troubling to me is that, you know, in my time here, we've spent the better part of a decade sort of expanding the view of what a library does and what we can be. Like I said, that we are a part of the education ecosystem, that we're part of the economic development ecosystem. And we've worked really hard at that. And I think we've made some inroads in positioning ourselves that way. All of that is really, really hard to get super excited about when so many of the questions that I get when we're out in the community is, you know, about if the library hires people to work at the library, that how do these books get into our collection when all of our materials get donated to us? I think there's this massive disconnect just culturally about how libraries function, that we are employees, that we are paid, we are professional, we are often county employees or city employees. state employees, that we have large budgets, that taxpayer dollars go to fund the materials that you see on the shelf, and that we take those responsibilities really, really seriously. And that's, I mean, that's a tough road to climb, when you're sort of having to explain your work and, you know, talk about things that I feel like have been assumed for several generations. But I think that's a conversation that a bigger organization could help with.
I agree. I think that the lack of understanding about how libraries work, I'm doing a webinar for my former community tonight about how libraries work, because some parents in the district have asked me to do that. So that conversation, I mean, sometimes within school districts, people don't even know how libraries work. So
Right.
I can't expect the general public to know, right?
And that goes right into maybe another question that we can try to get to. I'm looking at the time. And thanks for sharing that, Carolyn, because this ties into one of these questions, and that is what can those in the library community who aren't directly facing these challenges do to help? So I'll start with you, Carolyn, since you're going to be educating some folks in the public to help with these, you know, in educating. And then if we have a few more minutes, Sean, we'll let you do the same.
Well, I'll be brief so Sean can talk also, but I think I'm speaking up because I'm retired, you know, so I have the opportunity to weigh in with my experience, but with less, I mean, I have been personally attacked, but with less problem for my institution. So I think that's one thing people can do who are in situations, secure situations in their location or their profession, to be a voice. And you don't have to be controversial. It's not controversial, or it shouldn't be, to say libraries are a resource for students, and students are at the center of what we do in schools, or for, in public libraries, to talk about what you're the center of.
Any comments, Sean?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I'm sorry. I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. My headphones just made a weird noise. The thing that's come to my mind with that question is, I don't want it to be about us. Like, we have lots of support. We are handling this appropriately. There's not a lot of assistance that the library community can offer us that we're not already getting, or that we don't know where to go. I think what I would like to see from other organizations is to treat our experience and the school libraries in Texas that Carolyn's working with as a reason to get your own house in order. To use it as a reason to take a really good, deep, honest look at your policies and your procedures. Take a look at your board of trustee bylaws. Understand the processes for these materials challenges. Make sure that your state library and your support organizations are aware that you're doing that work. I think that's what I would love to see, is when the next challenge or the next wave of challenges happens, that the people that are making these challenges and these cultural forces are getting the exact same response that they're getting from us, from Carolyn, that whether they go to Idaho next or California next or Pennsylvania next, the answer is the same. The profession stands united, and that we take our work very, very seriously.
Yeah, I think we got time for maybe one more question, and before I'm going to have to wrap. So that is, do you have any thoughts on what type of training or resources would be helpful to prepare trustees, those boards, those board education members, for receiving the challenges? And what do you think they should know in advance? So, Sean, I'll let you continue on, and then Carolyn.
That's tough for me to answer. I think I think, I mean, the Montana State Library does a outstanding job of trying to train trustees, and they have sort of this small army of consultants that can go out and do that one-on-one training with trustees. I really think that working with trusted institutions like a state library, like a state office or a county office to just do some fundamentals of board service and board training and Robert's Rules of Order and what are bylaws and how do policies get written. Some very, very basic one-on-one training, I think, has been the most valuable thing that our board has gotten. And it goes a little bit deeper than that. I think it also needs to involve, knowing who all the players are, knowing what the role of the board is relative to the role of the library staff, relative to the state library and the state library association, these support organizations, sort of knowing what the landscape is and the roles that everybody plays.
Thank you. Carolyn.
And I think the same goes for public school boards. I know there's school board organizations in every state, but also, state libraries obviously can play a role in that, making sure that that education happens for school board members, because not every state school board association, they're under a lot of changes right now, the school board associations, and have had their own political woes. And so, state library associations and state libraries can and do play a role in helping educate school board trustees. And that's definitely something state library organizations can put together as well if they aren't already doing that. And then I just think, like I mentioned earlier, the history of young adult literature and the history of middle grade literature is actually really important for board school people to understand, have a better grasp of right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Sean. We're at the top of the hour. So I am going to say thank you so much. And for me as a public library director, I let you guys talk, but I certainly agree with everything you said and all the answers. And I hope that everyone else has found this information to be beneficial and helpful as we continue to fight these challenges and use the resources that we have available, and certainly DPLA's role and PLA and ALA and state associations and everyone to continue to work together so that we can, defeat these and get back to real library business. So I thank both of you. I thank everybody in attendance as well. And I guess I'm going to turn it over to Bracken now, John Bracken, to at this point. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you all so much. That was just such a deep conversation. The sort of the care and thoughtfulness that you guys are putting into your work really came across in what you were communicating. So I personally really appreciate you all sharing the empathetic craft that you're practicing. And I think you are leaving me at least with more questions than answers, but the DPLA team is already iterating on some of your ideas and what we're going to do, how we might take this forward. So thank you so much. Denise, I'm looking at you. I think we're done, but I'll let you see if you've got any closing words as we wrap this part up.
Just a very few. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists, to Sean and to Carolyn for joining us today and sharing some pretty sobering experiences, but also some very thoughtful ideas as to how we might manage what is going to be a protracted period of challenge, given the circumstances around us. Thank you to everyone else who sat in and participated today. Thank you for the wonderful questions that came forward. But that being said, we are at the end of our time. And so unless there's any new business, which I don't think we're going to have in this particular session, I'm going to adjourn our meeting and wish everybody a wonderful rest of your day.